Hello, welcome to Oregon Horse Council's Know Your Industry webinar. My name is Brandy Ebner, the Executive Director of Oregon Horse Council, and I'm joined today by Kathy Hall, Oregon Equine Attorney Extraordinaire, who's been part of our group since we started. Hi, Kathy. As well as Rob Edwards with Edwards Insurance. He is a full service insurance agent from Oregon as well. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining us. We know that this life we've been living for the last 3 or 4 weeks has been interesting with the whole COVID situation. There's been a lot of questions in the equine world of what can you legally do? What will insurance be happy with you if you do or don't do? And how do we navigate this, especially if you own a property like a boarding facility where you're relying on clients to be able to come in and care for their animals, or you're caring for them? What are all kind of the legal and insurance pieces around that? So we're here with both of you today to try to close that loop and provide some education to the equine world in Oregon. So first of all, the big question is, if you own a facility, you either train other people's horses or have boarding that other people trust you to take care of their animals, do you have a responsibility and potentially liability to close during this whole endeavor, this whole virus and the scare? So Kathy, let's start with you. What kind of responsibility do you have as caring for those animals right now?
So let's back off of the concept of close for a second and talk about what your duties are to those people who would be coming to your facility, whether they are your employees or your customers, and however you define customer. You have a responsibility to keep those people safe while they're on your premises. And that safety piece right now pertains specifically to the exposure to this virus. So you have to keep your employees safe from exposure to the extent you can, and that would involve complying with the governor's executive order and following sort of CDC guidelines. And then if you have customers on your premises during this time, you're going to have a responsibility to keep them safe as well. So that gets then back to, are you going to quote unquote close your premises to those individuals during this time so that you can perhaps limit the exposure of the people on your premises to that disease, or limit your own exposure because those people may be bringing it to you. So if you're going to define close as keeping my boarders out or keeping my trainers off the property, that might be one example. The other thing might be shutting everything down and doing everything yourself, regardless of how many employees you have on the premises. So there's a lot of gray area in here because you are providing care for animals during this time on some degree. So depending on how that relationship is between yourself and your boarders and the type of care that you're responsible for providing underneath the boarding arrangement you have with them, that might help guide how you want to define or how you want to, the extent to which you want to close your premises. If you have a self-care boarding arrangement, those people are responsible for providing for their own care for their own horses. So perhaps it might be more difficult to quote unquote close your premises to those people. If you have a full care facility and you as the facility owner, or maybe trainers that are on site working out of your facility, if they're providing all of those services, there really is no fundamental need for the horse's well-being to allow the owners of those horses onto the premises. So that kind of depends on how that boarding arrangement is defined or described. And the executive order that's in place now requires people to minimize their travel outside of their home. And frankly, if somebody is coming to your premises when really they have no responsibility to care for their horses, arguably they are violating state law as it stands now, and they are actually potentially committing a misdemeanor. So perhaps that's not really something that they want to be doing. Now, whether or not it's going to be enforced or not is a separate question, but whether there's insurance that might cover you, or a liability release or something that might help to protect you. The fact that those people might be essentially committing a crime by coming to your premises, that's something that you want to factor into your calculation on whether or not you want to open it up to them.
We have many more questions off of what you said, but I'm going to turn it over to Rob. So from an insurance standpoint, same kind of question is, what is your responsibility, and what would your, I guess, insurance provider say about your choice of whether to remain open or closed during this time?
Well, obviously law is number one. I mean, we're in unprecedented times. We've just never been through this before that any of us remember anyway. And as an insurance company, we are always going to defer, first of all, to what the law says. If you're not legally allowed to be there, it's going to be pretty tough to make a case that you should necessarily be covered. However, everything's, as we've talked about it, everything's open for interpretation, a little bit gray. Also, the idea of, there's a couple of different things you can look at. For a barn owner, you've really got two things. You've got liability of the people coming in, and which can be covered depending on your policy. Typically, it's, we're talking about injuries more than anything. So defining, who's at fault. If I go to the barn and 5 days later I test positive, are we going to be able to make a case that it wasn't likely the barn because we took these precautions, right? One of the things that we're in the business to do is to work with clients to help them mitigate risk, right? One of the things that we'll do on a regular basis is go out, meet with our clients, help them identify things that are creating risk. That's all our whole job is to help avoid risk. I actually have at a barn right now, and these are tough issues because, horse people, we are a little bit bonded with our animals. It's almost like saying, no, you can't come see your children. My recommendation is do everything you possibly can, and you're going to have to make some decisions. Is this covered or that covered? It's going to be tough to say because, again, these aren't things that have come up very often.
So is this a good time to call your agent and run through this kind of scenario and ask, really, what is your coverage and what would your company feel comfortable with?
It is. You're going to get, and again, a lot of the agents are probably going to say, you know what, I need to get more clarification from my underwriter about your specific policy. Because there's two things. There's liability. The other thing that can come in on a farm policy is loss of income. Am I covered for loss of income because I can't operate my barn? And the most basic loss of income will state something about there being direct physical damage that prevents it from being open. So again, it's another gray area that's going to depend on the language of your individual policy.
Mm-hmm. So obviously there's a difference. Kathy, you were mentioning if it's full service versus self-care. So say you have a self-care barn. So folks are coming on your property to care for their horses every day, but you as a property owner feel like you can't have that. Do those owners have the ability to say, even though you're on self-care, we're changing that agreement right now and we're taking care of your horses and you're out? Or do they have that ability to do that? Or would the owners of the horses be able to, essentially you can always go sue if you want, but what kind of liability is there?
Well, so just so I'm clear, you're saying that there's a self-care arrangement now and you want to stop it from being self-care and instead create some sort of full care or partial care arrangement with that boarding facility, or excuse me, with that horse owner.
Can you just change it up if you have an agreement already with them?
Well, it gets back to what's allowed under the executive order, and that's the public benefit, the public health concern of the state of Oregon is sort of going to override whatever your private contractual rights are going to be. So if you want to change that arrangement with your boarders, you would be probably within your rights to do that. They're going to complain about it for sure, and they're probably not going to have the extra money on hand to pick up that difference as it is because of the impact of this on their own financial situation. So maybe that's not something that in your particular situation you can do. It might be something that you want to at least offer It might be something that you want to say, for this set of my clientele, I want to do this, but for my other set of clientele, I'm going to do something different. You might have to be really flexible with your particular client base. But regardless of what you do, you really need to focus on maintaining the social distancing, focusing on emphasizing good hygiene practices, keeping your staff, if you have them, safe. Because on some level, as a practical matter, if those people are coming to your property, every single time they do that, they are exposing you to the disease. They are exposing other people who might be on your premises to the disease, whether they work for you or not. And so, the state's interest is in minimizing that risk of exposure. And what they have tried to implement through the social distancing policy, through some of the other public health policies, is to create environments where that risk of transmission is reduced as much as reasonably possible. So if you are going to cut off your boarders from coming out and taking care of their own horses, there's going to be a risk that you're going to lose some and they're going to want to go someplace else. Or you just, decide, hey, I'm going to allow them to come on the property, but these are the parameters under which they can do that. And if they push back and say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that, or I won't let you, they're probably not going to be in a position to sue you to recover any kind of money for the disruption that this has caused them, or the fact that they can't come and see their own horse, so long as the minimum requirements of maintaining those horses' health has been kept in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, one thing I have heard and seen, I know we've all watched the Facebook feeds, and there's people understandably upset right now that they can't go out and visit their horses. A lot of those are, some of them are in training, some are in full boarding or full care boarding situations. So if somebody feels like, that is my horse, I own it, you can't keep me off your property, period. You, as the owner of the facility, if they do try to come after you from a legal standpoint, especially Rob with insurance, is your insurance going to be able to back you up if they come and try to sue you during the situation?
It depends, right? I mean, I'm not sure where, property and liability would come in if they're suing for access to the property, because there's been no, specific damage there. You'd have to prove typically some kind of a loss, right? Some kind of monetary or damage loss. And I don't see that. I'm not, I'm not the judge and the jury, but right. There's no, not like you've injured my animal. If I was a barn owner and somebody got that way with me, I would say, fine, bring your trailer and we'll load your animal for you.
Kathy, what do you think about that?
I would agree with that. I mean, if you are providing the service that you were hired or being paid for, which is to board the horse, and you are still doing that, there's not going to be a claim for damage that's a viable claim, because you are still providing your end of the contractual arrangement. Hopefully they're still paying you, but you're still housing that horse, caring for that horse, cleaning its stall, providing it water, etc. And whether or not somebody is upset about being able to spend time with their horse or seeing their horse is not a legally cognizable claim. And if they don't want to comply with whatever restrictions you want to impose on your property, I would do exactly what Rob said. Tell them, you know what, you can terminate this contract and you can take your horse someplace else. I mean, that really is what it boils down to. If they are putting you at risk, they are putting your employees at risk, they are putting other boarders at risk. And if that is something that they are willing to do at your expense, then perhaps that's not somebody that you want on your premises, period.
Yeah. So Rob, earlier you mentioned that insurance there could be insurance that could help you out for loss of income right now. I know a lot of these facilities, trainers, people who rely on lessons and camps and things don't have any income, and they might not have income for a few months. So, how can somebody look into whether they've got some protection there? I know the federal government's rolling out some different programs from an insurance side. What can you recommend?
Sure. Well, certainly you start with your agent, number one. Look at the policy, farm policy, but they require a lot of expertise because there are so many different facets you can bring into a policy, right? It's not like a home and auto policy. I can ask you half a dozen questions. We can put your coverage in
Yep.
place.
Rob, you're cutting up a
It
little
is
bit.
what it is. With a farm policy, that's what I was afraid of. Just a moment. That open that window, please. We're rural people sometimes than others. So I actually live outside of banks. Anyway, going back to it, it really depends. Farm policies can be complicated, and it's going to be a matter of what the language of your policy says. There's not the policy for a farm type coverage, which is what the equine facilities fall into. It's a matter of selecting different pieces, bringing it in. It's like you're preparing a meal, right? What pieces do I want to bring into this meal? What coverages do I need? And that's why it's important to have a good agent that can come out, and it's why I like the business, frankly. I have to come out and I have to understand what exactly is going on at the facility. You know, do we have outside trainers coming in? Do we have our own trainers? Do they have coverage? All these different things. And loss of income is a type of coverage that can be added. So when I say each policy is different, it's really true. Each one is customized. And if that's maybe a discussion you want to have with your agent, because I know a lot of people, they don't know what's in their policies. And I get that. They're relying on us to be the experts. It's really a tough thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to come down to what the policy language is. And again, loss of the basic loss of income oftentimes requires physical damage that would prevent you from going forward. But not all of them, you know, so it's going to depend.
So with us being in the middle still of this pandemic, if somebody doesn't have the insurance that they would like set up to deal with this, do you think it'll be 6 months, a year, whenever this pandemic's done, that they'll be able to sit down with their agent and maybe update their policy to have better coverage?
I bet companies have put a stop on adding new loss income. I mean, just like there's a wildfire going on, you know, down the road, insurance company is not going to run out and let you insure your house right then. So yes, it's probably, you know, that what the time frame is, you know, your guess is as good as mine, obviously. But, you know, many companies have put a moratorium on increasing that type of coverage at the moment.
Well, sounds like about a year from now, we need to have you on a topic about that, knowing what to ask your agent and what to think about. So Kathy, from, you know, nobody plans this. I mean, it's been 100 years since a pandemic like this. In your boarding contracts and your agreements, I can't imagine very many people would have language in there for a situation that we're in. What would you suggest moving forward, knowing that, you know, something like this could happen? Is there any language you can add to your agreements with clients moving forward to kind of help better explain this or prepare for a situation like this?
Well, again, that falls back to the executive order sort of trumps, pardon the pun, whatever the language in your private agreement may be in terms of enforcing public health policies and things of that nature. But in terms of implementing some sort of emergency protocols, or whether they be for a horse disease or a human disease, you know, you can certainly add language into your agreement about that, and add language in there that would suggest that, you know, in the event of some sort of declaration of an emergency, either by the state or the national government, perhaps you don't need to comply with what might be a normal change in your rules or your policies, because oftentimes those are triggered on like a 30-day turnaround time. Like, you know, here's my new agreements, or excuse me, my new rules and policies. They will go into effect in 30 days so that that person can decide whether or not they're going to try to find another place to board their horse during that interim. You can add language into a release that pertains to disease transmission, communicable disease. I have done in the last couple of weeks a few of those for clients in Oregon and in Washington, because the states' executive orders in the two states are a little bit different. So you can add some sort of language in there about the safety protocols that you expect people to follow during this time, in terms of everything from the hygiene practices to what part of the facilities you're allowed to be in. Like, for example, you're not allowed to be in the tack room, or you're not even allowed to be in the physical confines of the building. You have to see your horse outside, and we'll bring the horse outside for you. Or you're not allowed to touch anything that doesn't belong to you, or you're not allowed to, use open gates and latches and doors without wiping them all down first. Things like that might be included in some sort of release language or rules or policies that you implement. And I think the other thing too is to make it clear that with this particular type of human disease that's transmitted relatively easily, that there be an acknowledgement on the part of the person signing that agreement that not only are they putting themselves at risk, but they are putting someone else at risk. And if you, as the facility owner, you might want to include some language in there about indemnification, which is somebody basically agreeing to hold you harmless in the event that you get dragged into something because of their actions. So that kind of language could be in there.
So I think after all this is done, everyone's probably going to go back to the drawing board and relook at agreements, relook at insurance, relook at how you financially afford what you're doing. And it will be updating a lot of things in the near future. I know from the nonprofit standpoint, I don't know of any nonprofits who have protocols in place for the situation we're in. So I'm going to be rewriting policy manual for sure for Oregon Horse Council. Is there anything either of you would like to add? Any pieces to this whole situation that you think would be useful for folks?
Rob, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that hit. No, absolutely. Well, we're still allowed to go in, but the rules are up. You've got to maintain your distance, and people are doing that. They're also saying, look, one of the things about barns is they're so great for young people, right? They are just such a great outlet, which is some of the toughest part of it. So really it's maintaining the vigilance. And I think people are taking it seriously, at least at our barn. If you're having a discussion with somebody, they're standing 12 feet from you, and most people aren't having a lot of social time. So, a lot of it comes down to making sense. If you've got questions, call your agent and see, do what makes sense. You just have to do what makes sense. And, even one of the things we've talked about is let's schedule the times when different people are allowed to come in. It's not everybody's coming in at 3:30. Let's say, if you can come in early in the morning, if you can come in late at night, if we can spread this out, it's all, it helps. And those types of things aren't that hard to do if you just say, we're going to sit down and we're going to think through what are the logical things that we can do. And that's what's worked for us.
Kathy, anything to add?
I would say that there is no cookie cutter solution that's going to work for everybody. It's all going to depend on the size of your business, the size of your facility, how your facility is laid out, what kind of accommodations you have at your facility. If you've only got a small ring and a tiny little tack room, you might have one set of rules that may not work or be even necessary for someone who's got a 300 by 200 arena and a 300 square foot tack room, or 15 foot wide aisleways. So don't be just because somebody else is doing something doesn't mean that you necessarily have to do the same thing. But if you're going to implement anything, you need to err on the side of reducing the likelihood of disease transmission, reducing the likelihood that people are going to have opportunities to interact with each other, and just do what in the short term might be relatively painful, but in the long term it will help us all get through this as quickly as possible and reduce the impact for everyone as a community.
Yeah. And the truth is this will end. We don't know what day, but it will end. Of course, people are strong. We're going to get back to normal. There might be a little bit of a new normal for a while, but I think I just encourage folks to please check with your agents, look at your contracts. it's great that we share information on platforms like Facebook, but I also think that there's a lot of folks on there who might share information that works for them in their situation, maybe even in their state that has different protocols than we do right now. And it might not work for you.
Absolutely.
So I know I've had people come to me and say, well, my friend in Nebraska said this. And it's like, well, Nebraska has a different order in place. So
Right.
let's make sure you're following Oregon's protocol. And remember, we're in the same scenario, but we're in different buckets right now. So I appreciate you both so much for taking the time to do this. Real quick, you can get a hold of Kathy at pnwequinelaw.com. And Rob is at robertedwardsinsurance.com. Both of those are great sources for information and questions. And we really appreciate you coming on today. We'll be talking to you both with more things down the road, it sounds like, for sure.
Great.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you so much. I really
Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.